Hey, here we are, everybody. Welcome in. It's Just Dubs. It's John Dickinson, Greg Silver, episode number 2 of our off-season edition of the show here, podcast version for KNBR, the sports leader. Greg, how you doing on this fine Thursday afternoon as we record this? A lot going on in the NBA. Still kind of the Warriors figuring things out with over a month to go before the draft, by which they will not be participating in. I know we were talking a little bit last week about the lottery and the 3-point whatever it was chance that they could move up into the top 4. Did not happen. That pick goes to Portland, and the Warriors have the 1 second-round pick in the draft coming up. The 2-night draft, by the way, coming up next month at the end of the month, June 26 and 27. And then free agency right after that. So it's going to be here before you know it, but things pretty slow on the Warrior front over the last few days.
Things are pretty slow. There will be no draft miracle. All is well, though. We'd been meaning to get an episode out, but then we had Mother's Day. I had a little gum surgery, so that pushed things back, but everything's good now, and welcome to the Golden State Valkyries. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show. The newest WNBA expansion team that's coming to the Bay, and what a year that's going to be in 2025 with All-Star Weekend coming to Chase. We don't know exactly what's going to happen to the Warriors. There's still a lot of questions, and yeah, they won't have a first-round pick, but as I like to say all of last season, never a dull day. I don't think we're going to have a lot of dull days come draft night or July 1st.
Well, and as we relate everything that's going on in the NBA playoffs, and as we sit here, the Celtics have moved on. They eliminated the Cleveland Cavaliers in 5 games, despite the usual home court malaise in game 2 for Boston. They go to Cleveland, they win games 3 and 4. They do finish the Cavs off in 5. And so really a big theme with Denver and Minnesota set to play tonight as we record this. The Knicks and Pacers have their game 6 coming up, and then game 6 on Saturday between Oklahoma City and Dallas. So 3 game 6s coming up in each of the next 3 nights here as we sit on Thursday afternoon. But a big theme of the first podcast was kind of running through all of the teams that had been eliminated in the first round and the storylines relating to those teams that could potentially relate back to the Warriors. So you look at the 1-8 matchup and what the Pelicans are going to do now with being eliminated, and does Brandon Ingram or others come into play potentially, Ingram being the big name there. You look at the Timberwolves eliminating the Suns. We had the Kevin Durant conversation. We didn't talk too much about LeBron James, although it sounds like he's going to be staying with the Lakers. I think everybody believes that.
Welcome Bronny to LA.
And yes, exactly. And welcome Bronny to LA as well there. So, and then Dallas and the Clippers. We spent some time on what ends up happening with the Clippers. Does Paul George wind up staying? What would the potential path be for the Warriors to be able to acquire Paul George? Again, that one more aligned with him opting in and then demanding a trade, and then potentially other teams having to get involved. And then in the East, it was Philadelphia with all their cap space and potentially the willingness to look to grab one of those players that we've just mentioned, whether it's Paul George or Brandon Ingram. Atlanta did win the lottery, which is interesting because they were a team that was thought could shuffle the deck. And I know we've talked a lot about DeJounte Murray as well as a potential trade piece that the Warriors could have some interest in, as the never-ending quest to find that number 2 player next to Steph Curry for 2024-25. Add in the Cleveland Cavaliers to that mix. And so we can touch on Atlanta a little bit and how them winning the lottery impacts things, whether they look to keep that pick. I think they'd be looking to do something big, to be honest, with that pick and moving players around, and we'll see what they do to change their thing. But the Cavaliers were a team we were going to be keeping an eye on. They do get eliminated in the second round. It sounds like there could be a coaching change there. I know there was reports today that the coaching staff and the organization were frustrated with big man Jarrett Allen with some of the injuries that he dealt with that kept him out of games in the playoffs. And then, of course, Donovan Mitchell is somebody that projects now with 1 year left on his contract next year to be moved, to want to go somewhere possibly that will become his more longer-term home here this offseason. So I think the belief is the Cavs have kind of peaked. They could be in position to retool, maybe a new coach, and could have some players that wind up being available. What do you see as far as Mitchell and or Jarrett Allen, who I know is somebody that was on the Warriors' radar at different points, either last offseason or even at the trade deadline a couple of months ago?
Well, the first part on Donovan Mitchell, what I found really interesting was the report that came out within the last week that said the Lakers would be front of the line to try to trade for Donovan Mitchell in this offseason. I was a little bit curious on that one because I'm thinking, what could the Lakers really offer? They don't have their draft pick. They don't have anyone besides LeBron James or Anthony Davis that I think is really worth the Donovan Mitchell prize. And I don't think they're going to want to trade one of their big two. So I was a little bit confused by that one. I've always loved Jarrett Allen as a player, though. Like back when he was on Brooklyn, I thought that the Nets, when they had KD and Kyrie, but before they had the blockbuster trade to get James Harden, that was a really fascinating team to me. And we didn't get to see a whole lot of it because you had two stars. Durant was looking pretty good coming off of missing a whole year to his Achilles. And then you had a bunch of really solid role players and a really good bench featuring guys like Karis LeVert, another Cavalier, Jarrett Allen, who ends up on the Cavs. And I think as far as what the Warriors are kind of in need of, Jarrett Allen, I don't really want to speak directly to the toughness factor or not being willing to play big games because that's where some of these frustrations are stemming from. And I don't think that would fly very well within the Warriors organization, but just the rim protecting factor and kind of fearlessness he can bring, like blocking the likes of LeBron James at the rim and stuff like that. I've always really admired his paint presence in that regard. And then with Cleveland, well, I'll get back to you, is there's also the factor of maybe they do keep Donovan Mitchell and they make a coaching exchange. But then it came out that from Darius Garland's camp that if Cleveland commits to Donovan Mitchell more long-term, Darius Garland could be on the move somewhere.
Yeah, and so I think you have to factor that in. Darius Garland, I don't think necessarily fits for the Warriors because he's a point guard that's 6'1". And so like I don't love the notion initially while he is a younger player. I think he's still 24 at this point. I think he's 24, I think, this year. So he'll be 25 next year. Darius Garland is somebody that, like, to me, you'd be more interested in Mitchell, but you'd have to be interested in Mitchell with the idea that you were going to keep Mitchell around for multiple years. And so like he kind of falls into the category of, and the interesting part, I think, with the Cavs and the Warriors is you look at the Cavs roster, the Cavs really don't have wing players. Now you could say, well, what are you talking about, JD? The Warriors don't have enough wing players. But the one thing that, this whole offseason comes down to, and we've talked about Kuminga a lot, and we're going to talk about Kuminga coming up a little bit in this podcast, because since the last time we did that, there was, a little bit of Kuminga news from Ramona Shelburne, who kind of, hey, the Warriors are going to do everything they can to keep Kuminga. So the question then becomes, can the Warriors actually get a second star without giving up Kuminga? And, Jarrett Allen's not a second star by any means. He's somebody that can help. I think Donovan Mitchell would fall into the category of second star. He would walk onto the Warriors roster and be their second best player immediately next to Stephen Curry. But the question becomes, and the reason the Warriors-Cavs thing is interesting to me is I wonder if they could be a team that would be interested in Andrew Wiggins. And where as the Warriors look to maybe move off of him would it be Andrew Wiggins and Jarrett Allen? That kind of a starting point for a package where they're going to commit to Mobley. They're going to figure out their backcourt. The Warriors take on a guy like Jarrett Allen, and then maybe Wiggins goes in that kind of a move, or at least that's the framework and the starting point. Obviously, the salaries and everything have to be aligned, and there would be more players going, I think, probably in both directions if those two teams were able to consummate a trade. But that's the one now with some of the reports about Jarrett Allen and the dissatisfaction, shall we say, or frustration from the organization. All right, our guy we're not happy with, your guy you're not happy with. I think anytime you look at Wiggins moves, that has to be the context of a Wiggins move. It's our guy we're not happy with, if you're a Warriors fan, their guy that the other team is not happy with. So I think that it fits the realm in that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's spot on, and that kind of needs to be the lens with which we look at any Wiggins discussion, because you're not going to go get Paul George for an Andrew Wiggins type of player while keeping Jonathan Kuminga, or all these hypothetical scenarios we sort of outlined in our previous podcast. But if it's a guy like Jarrett Allen where his team's frustrated with him, or things might not be so great in Cleveland and they do think they've peaked, or they're frustrated with teammates or the coaching staff, and there's going to be a bunch of ways things will get shaken up, then maybe there's a window there for the Warriors, and I think they'll certainly go and explore that. So it is going to be interesting, and I do think that watching the end of this season is going to continue to unveil different kind of storylines. I mean, the last time we were doing a podcast, Minnesota was up 2-0 on the defending champions, and in game 2, they made this iteration of the Denver Nuggets look as frustrated and useless offensively as we have ever seen. Everyone's got a short memory, though, and Denver, as champions do, they adjusted and they pretty convincingly won 3 games in a row. And now it's like, oh, is Minnesota just going to go out into the dark? And is Rudy Gobert a problem now? Like, I know Draymond Green has had a lot of fun on TNT saying how Rudy Gobert's kind of been a problem and that he hasn't really risen to the challenge of defending Jokic. Now, to be fair, no one can really defend him, although Draymond would disagree with that one and say that he thinks he's pretty good. And I think Draymond defends him about as well as anyone else in the league can. But Minnesota's another team to look for of like, are they going to want to hold on to Karl Anthony Towns? Is this Rudy Gobert trade aging as well as we thought it might be after the turnaround this year? Like, I don't know. And OKC, I think with them, it's not going to be as much of a big deal if they lose just because of their inexperience, and they have risen to the challenge a lot. And if you lose to Luka and Kyrie, 2 more experienced, and probably Luka, you could say, is a better player than Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at this point, I don't think that's as much of a cause for chaos. But at least in Minnesota, if they go down 4 straight after coming out with that dominance, I do think there will be some questions.
Yeah, I think the Minnesota stuff leads back to Towns more than Gobert, and although I will say I think the outside noise can seep in, because it's just everybody's been talking about Gobert off of Game 5, and the one thing that you wonder is, does the locker room hear that? Does the locker room believe that? Because, independent of a poor defensive series or defensive matchup for Gobert against Jokic, and independent of your opinion about that, sometimes players hear what the chatter is outside and start to look at a guy differently, and that can change things. And so I don't know if that's going to be the case in Minnesota. My sense is the organization still would be committed to Gobert and the ways that he helps them defensively be elite. Again, up until the point where you're in Game 5 and Game 6 of a second round series. Like, it's so funny. It takes these teams, and the Timberwolves are a perfect example. It's taken the Timberwolves 20 years to get back to the point that they are tonight, playing Game 6, or were a couple of days ago. It takes them 20 years to get to that point. And immediately when things go awry, it becomes, well, Gobert stinks in this matchup, and you can't win with Gobert, and you can't, and so okay, well, maybe that's true. Maybe you can never with Gobert beat Jokic for the next 3 years. Let's just say, for the rest of their primes, let's just say maybe you can't. But if you take a guy who's a foundational piece away from everything that you do that makes you successful to get to that point, well, then you're going to go right back down to being the Timberwolves that you've been, whether it's the last few years or you're like a 7-8 seed or potentially worse. Now, Anthony Edwards is going to have a say in that and his ascent. But I guess what I'm getting at is I don't see Minnesota panicking on Gobert as much as the noise. And I think we feel the noise because Draymond's involved in it. So I think we hear that noise louder here in the Bay. But I think if it leads to anything, it leads to, are they going to be able to pay everybody? Because I think their window is shorter than other teams' windows to make the most of this group as they currently have it, with McDaniels making a lot of money and with Towns making the money that he's making, and Edwards, a player that's, I'm trying to think, they didn't extend Edwards yet, right? Did they do the first extension with Edwards? I don't.
I'm going to double check this right now.
Yeah, I mean, if not, they are. I mean, it's. I don't know why I can't. Yeah, Anthony Edwards said it. Yes, he did. Yeah, he did. Okay, the 5-year, full max, 5-year super max, $204 million contract. So okay, I thought they had, and then I thought, wait, was it this year that they're anyway? Regardless, he's getting paid. Towns is getting paid. Gobert's getting paid. McDaniels is getting paid. So there comes a point where, this is a small market. Their ability, we talk about the Warriors, how are you going to keep paying everybody forever? I think somebody, Naz Reid for a sixth man is getting paid. So at some point you can't pay everybody. So to me, Minnesota relates back to Towns more than Gobert, even though Gobert's been the player that's been on everybody's minds the last couple of days, and fairly so. Like it's 100% fair to come out and say, look, this dude's a defensive player of the year and he's getting cooked. Like that's absolutely fair and true and accurate. But it also doesn't mean if you're Minnesota that you just say, yeah, we're going to throw that guy away and go back to being a 43-win team because he can't guard Jokic. Like,
yeah,
even if it's a bad look in the last couple of games, which it has been.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And I think that what you said about Minnesota's window being shorter with this particular group is fair because of the money restrictions. But I also think you can flip it the other way and say, looking at what Anthony Edwards is doing right now at the age of 22, that their window to be good and put good players around him is much, much longer than most teams in the NBA.
Totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. But from a Warrior standpoint, it's somebody may have to go. And can you get in on that action? And obviously it's not going to be Edwards. And, I would, again, they're going to have to internally make a decision because it's the same question that we've asked about the Warriors for the last month. It's how do you get better? How do you get better? And you can't always get better while also keeping everybody that you have. And so Minnesota has to ask themselves that question in their postmortem if they get beat. I know they're down. They were up 2-0. Series was over. Now they're down 3-2. Series is over. So
you might be seeing the reverse of Warriors Kings last year, where the road team wins the first 4 and then the home team wins the last 3.
Yeah, exactly. That could happen. We'll see. I mean, the Nuggets have looked like themselves, and the one thing that I did agree with Draymond about is the body language and those things coming off of Minnesota. Like I do think there was, and again, that doesn't mean that they can't win tonight and extend the series, but there was they found a gear and we can't match it anymore, and we're not going to win the series, and we know it. Like I had the same thought Draymond did on that particular point. But we'll see how it shakes out as far as tonight goes. So, yeah, Towns is somebody that we've talked about. I think as far, and you asked me about the Mitchell Garland tandem. I don't think Mitchell wants to be there. So I think they're also going to have to deal with that. Like, I think, Mitchell went there, but I don't think Mitchell wants to be there. So I think they're better off committing probably to Garland. And, if they have to make the choice between one of the two, I think that choice is kind of made for them because they have the ability to commit to Garland. And I think he would be willing to stay if he's going to be maybe a higher option in the pecking order. But the way he would be a higher option in the pecking order is if Mitchell isn't around, which I think is probably what Mitchell wants anyway. So I think it kind of, I'm not saying it works for all parties. It might work for Garland. It might work for Mitchell. I don't know that it works for the Cavs, because they have to ask themselves the how do they get better question. And by no means do I think a deal where it's Wiggins for Jarrett Allen necessarily makes the Cavs better. Like that would have to be the first of a number of moves to retool things. But if Jarrett Allen is a problem and Andrew Wiggins is a problem, again, it comes back to you got to look problem. And so I do think there's been some further developments here with some of these teams and the way things have played out here over the last week.
It could be the full circle moment for Andrew Wiggins, the team that drafted him number 1 overall. He finally gets to play for. No
doubt. And I want to look at Jarrett Allen's contract situation too. So I'm gonna look at that right now. I'm gonna bring that up here. And so Jarrett Allen is, let's see, he's like straight $20 million a year for the next 2 years and then becomes an unrestricted free agent. So he had a straight up 5-year, $100 million 2020 contract. Simple and easy to remember for Jarrett Allen. So you look at, he's got 2 and 40 left on the deal. Wiggins has got more than that left on his deal. And so, and Jarrett Allen at this point is the better player than Andrew Wiggins right now.
The younger player.
Yeah. So again, it comes down to, if we flesh this out, it comes down to the Warriors would have to add salary to the deal. In addition, the Cavs would have to add salary to the deal as it's currently constituted. And the Warriors would be getting the better. So you're talking, if you're looking at an initial framework here, it's Wiggins for Allen, but find a bad contract that the Warriors would have to take back in the, say, $8 to $12 million range that they would have to come back with. And then do you have to give the Cavs something else in addition to that? Becomes the issue, whether that player's salary raises it to where the Warriors have to include another player. Would you have to include another useful player? And I think you might. I think you might have to include another useful player and take somebody back that helps they'll bump the money back. So that makes it a little bit trickier, I think, if you're the Warriors, when you get down to the nuts and bolts of would Jarrett Allen work as a possible trade. Again, throwing Kuminga out of it, because I don't think Kuminga does not fit in a Jarrett Allen move for to me. Like, I would not be giving up Kuminga for Jarrett Allen.
No, absolutely not.
No. So it's, at that point, looking at the Cavs roster a little bit, because I think this is what I got to click around here. As always, Greg, I have too many windows up. And
hey, it's okay. Today, I'm looking at my tabs when I was scrolling through, looking for Anthony Edwards' contract and everything, and I'm thinking, wow, I'm reaching JD levels.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot going on. Cleveland Cavaliers salaries. And let's see here. Looking at 24-25, they've got Garland who's making 36. Mitchell 35 for next year. I mean, Garland's 36, 39, 42, 44 the next few years. So he got the big deal as well. Basically in that Anthony Edwards range, which is kind of crazy to think. The Evan Mobley's going to be extension eligible. So they're going to have to pay Evan Mobley or make a determination on Evan Mobley. And so then you look at some of the other players there. I mean, Karis LeVert, Max Strus,
Dean Wade.
Yeah, Dean Wade making 6. But yeah, LeVert 16-6, Max Strus 15-5 for a few more years. I mean, I mean, Max Strus would be nice, but again, you know, if you're throwing Max Strus in, then maybe we are talking about Kuminga at that point. If it's Strus and Allen, you know, because then we're talking about 2 starters basically that would be coming the Warriors' way. So I don't know. Again, as we try to look this, you know, look at some of the different potentials. LeVert 29, like that would have to be. I mean, I don't think Cleveland would be giving up LeVert or Strus, to be perfectly honest. But those are the names that would fit in terms of money to try and get it closer to Wiggins' deal. And those are, like, I don't consider those to be bad contracts that you'd want to get off. Maybe Niang. Niang is another one. Niang's making 8.5 and 8.2 the next couple of years. So maybe Niang, that's an interesting one that, you know, you put those two together, you get to 28, which is closer to Wiggins and where he's at. So I don't know. You got a take on any of that?
I guess the fact that his name is George's, that last S stands for $, because I don't know how he's making 8.5.
Yeah, 8.8 this year, 8.5 next year, 8.2 the following year. So he does have one of those deals that goes down as I look at it here. And then Andrew Wiggins for next year. Andrew Wiggins has, since we went through this at the end of last year here, Wiggins has 26.2. So it's actually a little bit less than I thought. So they are closer. Yeah, the Niang contract would work. And then 28.2, and then Wiggins has a player option for 30.1 and 26.27. So yeah, looking at Cleveland, Niang has, he's only through 25-26. So the Cavs would be taking an extra year back. So I think to me, the hypothetical would be Allen and Niang for Wiggins and blank. Wiggins and a small, a small throw-in kind of a deal.
And if blank is Trace Jackson Davis, who's on a really cheap rookie deal, that's a no.
No, it wouldn't be TJD. It wouldn't be Moody. It wouldn't be Pajemski. That's just, again, some food for thought there. If you're gonna, what we're gonna do is look at the names, we're gonna look at the options, and we're gonna look at what it would have to look like if the Warriors were gonna have to do some. So that's the Cleveland postmortem portion of Just Dubs here as we record podcast edition. John Dickinson and Greg Silver for KMBR, the sports leader. Keep an eye on Karl Anthony Towns and what happens with the Minnesota situation. We'll get into some other news here coming up for just a second, and we'll talk a little bit about the second round series that are winding down, since our next podcast will be once the conference finals are set here in a few days, and should let everybody know too who's listening, or if you are clicking through and watching the recording of this on the KMBR YouTube page, we are going to try to do every 4 days or so. We're going to try to drop one, or if there's big news, we're going to try to make sure that that's the day that we drop it, assuming Greg and I don't have some other responsibilities that prevent us from doing so. But we're going to try to do that as soon as possible here. I want to get to the Ramona Shelburne Kuminga. Warriors are going to do, everything they can to keep him. I know that had been aggregated out as, untouchable was a word that was used and posted in print, or close to untouchable, almost untouchable. I think, look, we know the Warriors' affinity at certain levels of their organization for Jonathan Kuminga, and we know that they don't want to and shouldn't, frankly, look to just give him away for a middling player. Like, nobody's ever said that on this podcast or on Dubs OT or on KMBR over the airwaves. But the question that I've asked is, how do the Warriors get that second best player next to Steph Curry without at least examining the possibility of including him in the deal, unless you believe that he can be that guy next year and is going to be a future star in a couple of years. And then the second part of that, Greg, is, can the Warriors do that effectively without, is there a pathway to, hey, you're going to keep Kuminga and you're going to get DeJounte Murray. Hey, you're going to keep Kuminga and you're going to get Brandon Ingram. I just don't, that level of player, I just don't see how that's possible.
I don't either. And I think that when it comes to Jonathan Kuminga and trade discussions, it's not that Jonathan Kuminga is somebody that the Warriors need to trade because there are areas of his game that aren't fully polished yet. It's more, and really, frankly, only because that is your only real asset that can get you a true second best player, that can get you into top 5 seed in the West, outside or better shot at contending for a championship. It's nothing against the player himself. I think there is plenty of reason to believe that he could have another leap this year. Can he play the 3? I don't know. That's still to be seen. But I think that when you see what you saw last year, and the kid's 21, of course there's reason to believe that Jonathan Kuminga could get better. But the difficult part is that not only is he really the only valuable asset you have to try to go get another proven star, he's just not quite at this point on the Stephen Curry timeline. So I don't know if Jonathan Kuminga at the age of 25 is going to be somebody that's a surefire all-star and could lead a franchise. But at the age of 22, I don't know if he could be the second best player on a title contending team. And I think a lot of signs would point to no, just based on last year. And that's not because I'm against the kid. It's not to come down his road. I just think the Warriors have to have a little bit of a realistic perspective with it. And you sort of got to pick one of two sides. I think where people lose me, JD, is when they simultaneously believe that the Warriors need to do everything they can to maximize what's left of Stephen Curry and try to get that 5th ring, even if it means your future after that is going to be pretty bleak and it's going to be a real, true rebuild from the ground up. If you simultaneously believe that and that Kuminga is going to be an MVP candidate this year or the next year, I don't get how those two things work. To me, that's where there's just a little bit of a clash. I think you can believe that the Warriors should do everything they can to get Steph. I think you can believe that Kuminga has a serious, great future in the NBA and he's not worth letting go, even if it means the Warriors probably don't contend for a title this year or the next year. But
or ever again with Steph. Or ever again with Steph.
Yeah, or ever again with Steph. To me, it's you can't have your cake and eat it too in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. But it's also because you do hear this, if you are a Warrior fan that's comfortable with play the young guys and Steph and Draymond, and okay, again, if that's your stance on it, that's fine. But you're not contending for a title, and unless Jonathan Kuminga turns into a superstar by really the end of next year, probably. And I think he has to be showing it this year. I'm not, the one thing I'm not buying, your plan for next year cannot be Kuminga's going to take another leap. That can't be your plan. Kuminga's going to play the 3 and take another leap, and they're going to ship Wiggins out, and they're going to be better. And they're going to play the young guys more. And it just you can do that, but to me, the ceiling for that is probably play-in tournament. Like the ceiling for doing that is play-in tournament. And maybe it's 7 or 8 and not 10, depending upon some of the ancillary pieces, or maybe the West is more mediocre like it was in 2023 as opposed to truly deep and good, which I think it was in 2024. And you end up in a little bit of a better position. To me, what you don't want, Greg, is you don't totally know on Kuminga. You want to find out, so you keep him around. You don't contend the next couple of years with Steph Curry, and then you get to the point where Curry is on the downside or gone, and you look at Kuminga and you go, oh yeah, he's not only is he not a superstar, maybe he's a really good player that's not even quite an all-star, and now you've got Kuminga potentially as your best player, and you're a lottery team for the next 3 or 4. Like you don't want to get to that point where you don't take the chance the next 2 years to try and really be in the mix. And then you find yourself in essentially a similar position that you'd find yourself in if you had gone for it in the post Steph Curry era, which I do think is a result that's on the table, despite the optimism surrounding not only Kuminga, but Podziemski and Trace Jackson Davis, and even if you want to throw Moses Moody in there as well.
One thing that I've noticed in my basketball viewing experience over the past 5-6 years or so with a lot of these young stars, when I first really had that eye-popping moment, I think you could kind of tell that they were coming and they were going to be something good, and that was almost always in the postseason. Like John Morant kind of had that coming out moment when he knocked off the Warriors in the play-in tournament, and yeah, they didn't end up winning that series in the first round against Utah, but he had like a 40-point game or something, and you're like, whoa, this guy's pretty good. I think Tyrese Maxey in the 2021 playoffs, I remember people were like, is Tyrese Maxey or Shake Milton better? Tyrese Maxey was by far the better player when it came to big boy basketball. I think Anthony Edwards and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander last year were making big strides to where you're like, okay, they're coming. And Jonathan Kuminga, call it fair or not, he hasn't had a ton of playoff reps. And when he has, it really hasn't shown any flashes of that to me.
No, he hasn't been good. And you can say circumstantial because of the injuries and being out of rhythm in the one game against Sacramento. He got played off the floor in the other series that he was involved in against Sacramento. And again, didn't really play significantly in the 22 playoffs to really know either way, basically a 10th or 11th man at that particular point. But I think some of the names you mentioned is, again, I do think there are a lot of Warrior fans that view Kuminga, and I'm not ready to write him off as not being able to be in that conversation, but like I think for the time being, we need to stop viewing him as if he's going to be Tyrese Maxey or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Anthony Edwards level of player. Like I know, again, Twitter is not reality, but you've sent me a couple of tweets during the playoffs where, fans are expecting certain levels of play that some of these guys on these other teams are providing. And I'm just kind of laughing, like he's nowhere near that on a playoff level. He's been nowhere near Jaden McDaniels in the playoffs or Jalen Williams of Santa Clara at times in the playoffs. I mean, Josh Hart, Josh Hart in the playoffs is not a star by any means. He's probably more of a Draymond Green glue guy in his own way for the Knicks, who are built on a bunch of glue guys. But Josh Hart is an extremely impactful 16-game playoff winning type of a player. Kuminga to this point is like he's not on that level or of any of these guys.
No, absolutely. And I think that it's not me saying that I'm writing him off either, but I think the reason I mentioned those names, like your Tyrese Maxey's and your SGAs and your Ja Morant and Anthony Edwards is because for that very reason of I can't put him in that category yet without kind of laughing at myself. And it's not that I don't believe in him or that I don't think he has the capabilities of getting to a point where he's a really good player on a really good team. But I just think it's the philosophy of we got to pump the brakes on where he's at right now. And the reason I'm so adamant about not looking at the hypotheticals or extrapolating into 2 years is because the window's so short with Stephen Curry, and the Clay window might be really short and it might be gone. And the Draymond Green window is really short, and the Steve Kerr window might only be these next 2 years with his extension. So, like, it's not any personal opinion or agenda against Jonathan Kuminga, but because of the way this team is built and the inevitable of a dynasty ending coming sooner or later, you can't look at the extrapolation. You have to look at what is it right now.
He can be a winning role player on a pretty good team that makes the playoffs and maybe even wins around. Like he can be a part of that. But I think that's like
right
now, next year. But the rest of the team has to get better in order for that to happen. Like I believe in that, but I also think that should be the expectation. Like that should be an acceptable expectation. And, not looking at him to take a leap to where he's the two. Like I view him. I think the Warriors should view it these next couple of years as you want him to be your third scoring option, and hell, maybe even your fourth, to be honest, but at least your third. At least bring in somebody who's closer to. You got to bring in somebody who's clear cut the Warriors' second best player. That's what it all continues to boil down to. And again, it's the debate of, can you do that without including, and you said it better than I did, the player who's your most valuable young asset to do it. That's where I think the Warriors may potentially find themselves in a position where they're stuck, because that's very different than the Wiggins, we're going to trade our problem for your problem type of a conversation. All right, let's continue here with just a couple of thoughts on the playoff series that are ongoing. The Nuggets up 3-2 as we record this after being down 2-0. Not surprised. I had Denver in 7 in this series before it began. I didn't think they were going to be down 0-2. From watching Minnesota and Denver play in the regular season, I thought that it was going to be a competitive series. I thought Minnesota would be a handful for Denver. Denver figured it out. They figured out their spacing. They figured out that I think they needed to be a little more Jokic dependent. And I think Jokic raised his level, which it has allowed others. The Denver bench has also been good. Now I've maligned their bench, but Holiday and Brown have provided a spark for them. So I think Denver's going to win the series. I don't know if it's tonight or if it ends up going game 7 and Denver wins it, but they righted the ship, and they showed just when everybody was kind of, they're maybe they were fraudulent champions, or they showed that that's very much not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I will give myself a little bit of credit here, and I feel bad that I can't really provide any proof of this except for the couple of text messages. But when I was in the office last week, Derek Papa, when it was 2-0, was like, so what do you think of this Minnesota-Denver series? And I said, I think Minnesota should be favored to win the series right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 2-2 with those 2 road games. And it did happen. Then after that, I thought the home team would win every game left. So it happened with Denver. In the same way that I didn't want to write Denver off, I had a hard time thinking Minnesota, led by the fearlessness of Anthony Edwards, was just done and wasn't going to be able to string together another good game. But at this point, I'd be very, very impressed, and I see it very unlikely if Denver gets beat twice with a 3-2 lead with the way that they've been playing. And here's the thing, JD, that I've always loved about Michael Malone is he will just publicly put his team on blast, whether they play bad or whether he just thinks they play bad and it didn't look that bad to us. Like after game 2 of the finals last year, when it was 1-1 and Jamal Murray had a look to send the game to overtime, Michael Malone was publicly at the podium talking about how I don't know why this team needs motivation when it's the NBA finals, and basically said they weren't trying hard enough. And then they righted the ship and won the next 3 games, and it really wasn't that close of a series. So I think when I saw that, I wasn't too concerned that Denver wasn't going to find a way to make some adjustments and get a couple of games.
Well, they've done, I think, similarly to this. They've been more similar to the Celtics the last couple of years than people think, just in terms of they have played. They don't play as hard at home, in some, like they don't play as focused at home. They didn't in the games against Miami in the finals last year, the conference finals against the Lakers. Those games were closer. The games in Denver, and then they went to LA, and it was like they hit another gear and they controlled those games. Or if they got down, they immediately came back and took control of those games. A lot of those games on the road look like the games that they played in Minnesota. And so, yeah, I think Denver, even the series last year against Phoenix, they would go, they went on the road in game 6 and ended that thing and played, dominantly. So I think they've got a little of that at home where they kind of play comfortable. Watching Minnesota all year, Minnesota I've seen have some clunkers at home. And Chris Finch, to your point on, coaches, he said it, he thought they basically had, sat around and got fat and happy were his terms, being up 2-0 with the 3 days in between game 2 and game 3. So fascinating. The champions have punched back. I do think they win the series. I'm not saying it's automatically done. I wouldn't be surprised if it ends in 6, but I do think you look at, what's going on with, if it needs to go to a game 7, I would still take Denver to win that series in 7. Boston moved on. Again, they figured it out. They're the better team. What do you think if Boston plays the Knicks? I don't. We can get into Knicks Pacers as part of that. I know head-to-head wise, that's been a tough matchup for the Knicks. Boston's kind of owned them the last couple of years. I think they took 4 of 5 in the regular season. They played 5 times because of the in-season tournament this year. And Boston's going to taste it, I think, a little bit more now, the ability to get back to the finals. The Knicks are banged up. I was worried about the Knicks with the Anunoby injury. I thought that had the ability to...
That was a big part of my answer.
Yeah, and so I was worried about them in the Indiana series. I think they're going to win the Indiana series. Again, might take 7, but I think they'll have enough. I think they get enough juice with the energy in the Garden. And the Pacers,
Indiana on the road has been terrible all postseason,
and they kind of wilt in that info because that's a road environment, but that's a road environment, and then another level or 5. And so I just don't think the Knicks lose an elimination game if they have to play it at the Garden in that series.
No, I don't think. I'm not going to go too deep into Knicks Pacers because I think the Knicks end up walking away with that. The OG Anunoby, I was going to say that I hate to give you a cop-out answer, but what's his health if it's Knicks Celtics Eastern Conference Finals? Because we've talked about OG Anunoby and how that's the exact type of player that a true small forward that can play D and slash and dunk that could fit the Warriors, but his big asterisk is he's injured way too much for his young age. And look, they're like 26-5 with just OG Anunoby, even take away all those other injuries that the Knicks have had. So that makes a huge difference when he is present. So that's kind of why I'm like, well, if he plays, I think it could be a good series. But yeah, man, like the Knicks have an unbelievable affinity for winning clutch games in the playoffs. I think maybe they've lost twice, once with the Andrew Nembhard long shot dagger, and then the other one with Tyrese Maxey just having a diabolical fourth quarter and overtime and just willing the Sixers back to life there for a second. But the Knicks are great in these close and clutch situations. for that reason, I think if OG Anunoby plays, we could have a really good series on our hands. If he doesn't, given all the other Knicks injuries and the Celtics explosiveness, I think it's a series they probably end up winning. Now, I don't know if that's 5 games, 6 games, if it's got to go all the way to 7 back at the Garden, a TD Garden, that is. But yeah, I think it's a Celtics win unless OG Anunoby is remotely himself and available.
Yeah, and I do think it's shaping up for the series that I want to see, which is Denver and Boston in the finals. I mean, we'll see. I think Dallas is going to prevail. I think I had Dallas in 7 over Oklahoma City. It might not take 7, but look, OKC showed they can go in there in a tough spot down and win at Dallas in Game 4. So could they do it again? I think elimination games are different. Especially when a team's already maybe dropped one at home and now has a chance to close it out like the Mavs do. So, no real indictment of OKC. They've had a hell of a season. They handled business against the Pelicans without Zion. They've been competitive enough in this series. I think this is a tough matchup with the Dallas additions, and some of Dallas's size has hurt Oklahoma City in ways that they can be hurt. But all in all, for OKC to go from the 10 seed to the 1 seed to a second round exit, if that's how it plays out for them, which is where it's trending right now, I think that's a hell of a season. And they're going to be a team to watch for. Do they cash some of their draft capital and or a young player or two to try and add a star to the mix? I don't think I would do that if I were OKC. I would maybe cash draft capital. I wouldn't cash a player.
They have way too many picks.
I would keep Shea. I would keep Jalen Williams. I would keep Chet, obviously, Dort. I don't know. I like their young player. I would let it ride with their young players one more time. And
although Giddey's been pretty terrible this series.
Yeah. I noticed I didn't include him. But yeah, he would maybe be the one. That's a good point. That he would maybe be the one. Him and picks, could that get you something? Like I don't know. I think they should stick with the Shea, Chet, Jalen Williams, and I'll even throw Dort in there combo. As far as the framework for what they have, and then see if the picks can add. So I think real nice year for OKC, and then next year is their opportunity to see, all right, how do they build off of it?
Yeah, I'd say OKC and Indiana would be the 2 teams where if they do lose in this round, you can hold your head high and not really worry too much about it, knowing that they've made big leaps and bounds. They got a young star. They're headed in the right direction. Cleveland, I would say it's disappointing for a different reason than maybe some of these other teams, just because it's all probably going to get blown up now. And you kind of think that this was the peak with this version of the team. But yeah, if OKC loses in 6 or even 7, I don't consider it too bad of a letdown for them, even if they were the number 1 seed. If you get beat by Luka and Kyrie and a Mavs team that's really turned it around after the trade deadline, then it happens, man. Like, you got a lot of really good years ahead of you with this young core and all the picks that you've amassed.
Let's hold off on Dallas versus Denver, because that's obviously not official. I know we did talk a little bit about Boston and the Knicks, but let's hold off on that, because we are going to try to record another one of these maybe at some point Sunday or Monday to get it out to the people. And we will know the matchups in all likelihood. I think only OKC is the Monday series. I think OKC and Dallas would have to go 7. We'll know everything else by Sunday. As far as does Denver move on or Minnesota? I think their game 7 would be Sunday, and the other 2 in the East. The one's done, but if they go 7 in the East in New York, it'll be on Sunday afternoon, I believe, or Sunday morning. Here on the West Coast. So final couple of thoughts here, Greg, on the Valkyries. Welcome the Golden State Valkyries. I like it. I people are going to hate, and there've been a little, I'm not going to name names, but there've been a few people that have kind of been, I don't know. I think it's awesome. I think it was well put together. I think that the color scheme is great. I I don't know. I think they nailed it. I think they nailed it.
Down to the detail of the logo and all the significance of that. I really liked it too. I think color scheme's fun. It's something that the WNBA doesn't really have right now. I think that there's going to be
they used to. There used to be a WNBA team that wore not violet, but purple.
That's a separate discussion. But yeah, it's something the WNBA doesn't currently have. Rather, I do think that women's basketball is a sleeping giant that is starting to wake up big time. There's a lot of stars coming into the league. I think expansion teams are great because you have a lot of players that were really good in college that can't necessarily get on a roster when there's only 12 teams. And I think this market and the West Coast in general is going to go bananas for it. So I'm really looking forward to that. And, possibly we'll get some Valkyries related events mixed in with Dubs OT as it gets closer to the season. Got my new sticker right up here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Your head, you said you had it, and then I must have turned down because your head's blocking it. So I was like, where is it? I don't see it. But I must have looked away.
Kind of glaring at it right now too. But yeah, it should be great. And the one thing I'll just say for those who are getting into it a little bit sooner, which absolutely no problem, they probably won't get Paige Beckers. They're probably going to get the number 4, maybe 5 pick. The last time there was an expansion team back in 2008, it was the Atlanta Dream. They got the number 4 pick, actually traded out of that. But the big prospect in that year was someone named Candace Parker, who was pretty good. And the LA Sparks won that draft lottery.
Yeah, they rigged the lottery for the Sparks to get Candace Parker. I'm just kidding.
It may have happened. So, but yeah, look, regardless of what they can get in their expansion draft or next year, you look at the college game and some of these players coming up. Could Juju Watkins be on the table when she comes out of college? Like, there's a lot of really good players, and like I said, sleeping giant for the sport of women's basketball. And I think this is a great market to go and expand on that.
It's going to crush in the Bay. It's going to absolutely crush, and it's really the perfect time. I think it's a perfect storm with the explosion of the women's game and the explosion here of the college game, and it's, I think, led to the WNBA and what Caitlin Clark's home debut tonight, which pushed the Pacer Nick game to tomorrow, and so I think it is a perfect storm in terms of timing. As far as just the excitement level, and then the Bay hopping on as basketball crazy as the Bay and all of Northern California really is for hoop. So I think it's going to be tremendous, and it's fun to be able to now know the team. I mean, they got to build the team. There aren't any players yet, but to know the team name, but basically have it coincide with a year before the team's actually going to play. Like, you can just, you can watch this whole season with the lens of Golden State being a part of it here a year from right now, basically.
Yeah. And, one thing that's really cool and gives me a lot of optimism too, is that this other team that I got behind me, the Bay FC, the new NWSL team, I've gotten to go to a couple of public events there, gotten to know some of their staff and talk to a couple of the players. And one of the things I talked about with Savvy King, who was the number 2 overall pick in this last year's draft, she's just 19, but I asked about the environment of playing at PayPal for the first time and just getting on the field in general. And it's really seems like on the West Coast is where you get these more rabid crowds that are really into it. So I think geographically, this is awesome. I think based on some of the events I went to ahead of Bay FC's debut and kind of seeing what the local community was like and rallying around that team, I think there's a true hunger for it, and it's not something that's fabricated. So I know Chase Center is a little bit on the pricier side, and that's a separate discussion, but I do think it's going to crush, no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And so, yeah, as more of that news breaks, we'll be popping it in here to the podcast a little bit with just Dubs. So yeah, appreciate it.
GSV.
Greg, thank you, man. We all right, we're going to do about 35, 40 minutes. We end up doing basically an hour right on the dot, but a lot to discuss, always fun. And we'll talk to you in a couple of days. For Greg, I'm JD, just Dubs, KNBR, the sports leader.